All righty. Well, hello, Mary, and welcome to Presque Audubon's member programs. We're going to be listening to Mary talk tonight. She's from the Erie Bird Observatory along with Presque Audubon, and she's going to share the high and low lights of the 2022 nesting season at Gull Point on Presque State Park. It was another extraordinary year with the first 5-month season in the books. It lasted from April 15 to September 15. That's why she's still tired, still catching up. Discover what new milestones were reached, the continuing intrigue of a philandering male, and the ultimate success of plover chicks into the Great Lakes population. Mary will also include an update on the continuing attempt by common terns to successfully nest at Gull Point and a few of the season's most notable migrant shorebirds. Mary Birdsong is the lead shorebird monitor for the Erie Bird Observatory. She's been monitoring shorebirds, particularly the piping plovers, since 2015. She's also the program chair for Presque Audubon. She's a freelance writer and an artist. She shares her home with her husband, Mike Plyler, 2 tabby cats, and is the proud Busha to 3 granddaughters. Welcome, Mary.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here. And for anybody who was here last year I was the proud Busha to 2 granddaughters. And now I'm the proud Busha to 3 granddaughters. So things have happened in the past year.
What?
Thank you for that introduction, Sue. We're going to talk about, of course, piping plovers tonight and common terns and some of the more notable shorebirds. But I'm going to start out with well, I suppose I need to get this presentation up here. I need to share my screen first. Yes, okay. There we go. Okay. Everybody see that?
That looks good, Mary.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to talk about plovers, terns, and shorebirds galore. I don't know about the galore part, but they were nice. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is give you a brief introduction to Erie Bird Observatory. It was created in 2018, and it continues the bird work that had been going on in the area under the auspices of a different organization. And our mission is to foster enthusiasm for birds and conservation through avian research and public engagement. One of the ways we do that is through bird banding, and our bird bander, Laura Marie Koich, is on the Zoom call tonight. So if you have any banding questions that are not related to piping plovers, she might be able to answer those. There's the mist nets on the left-hand side of your screen, the bands that are used to put on birds, and the measuring of a bird's wing, which is one of the things that they do in collecting data about the birds. Banding has occurred at Presque Isle since 1960, and it concentrates on migrating songbirds, forest birds. It always happens in the spring and now more frequently in the fall, as long as we have good weather, right, Laura Marie? We do education and outreach, and part of that is having the banding station open to the public, primarily on the weekends. This gives people the opportunity to see the birds in the hand and learn about how and why banding is so important to understanding birds, their habitat, and their movements. We also conduct bird walks that are open to anybody, and presentations like this one. And we can do that for any group. If my slides jump around, it's because my mouse is, I think, haunted for Halloween. So I apologize. We also conduct marsh bird monitoring. Chris Lundberg, who a colleague, is, I think, also on this call tonight. And he tracks nesting species throughout the marshes at Presque Isle. He's one of the earliest risers I know. And he's like putting his kayak in at sunrise or before. EBO also works with utility companies to create and install nesting platforms for ospreys that are away from utility poles, because utility poles and osprey don't get along very well. They can cause fires, and that's bad for the birds, of course, and also for people, because it puts people's power goes away. And of course, what we're going to talk about tonight, the piping plover and common tern monitoring that we do here at Presque Isle. We do that because the Great Lakes population of piping plovers are federally endangered and state endangered as well. And common terns are a state endangered species. And Presque Isle is very important because they're the only place in the state that has the appropriate habitat for both of these ground nesting birds. We also count shorebirds, all the other shorebirds that are on the at Gull Point during our monitoring season. For those folks who are not familiar, sorry, before I go on, there is an organized piping plover common tern recovery team that consists of the following agencies: the Pennsylvania Game Commission, which has jurisdiction over the birds; U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which oversees endangered species nationally; of course, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, which has jurisdiction over the park; U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which do consultation and sand replenishment at the park; and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, primarily the I've lost the name of the Pennsylvania Heritage, Native Heritage, somebody, I can't remember. Anyways, they lead the plant management at Gull Point in collaboration with DCNR. And what that does is remove invasive species, keep woody plants down to a minimum, and do other consultation on the native species plants that are there. Erie Bird Observatory's role is to watch the birds, keep an eye on their behavior, record what they're doing and when they're around. And that's me over there on the right, the sweaty me on the right hand side, doing my monitoring. For those of you who are not familiar with the topography of Presque Isle State Park, that is Erie and Mill Creek Township down on the bottom. The state park is on the recurve sand spit that juts out into Lake Erie. Gull Point is the furthest northeast point. And you can see in the red, the designated critical habitat that has been set in place by U.S. Fish and Wildlife based on the historical nesting areas of both the piping plover and the common tern. So throughout the season, we monitor from the Lake Lighthouse all the way out to Gull Point. Gull Point itself is a very dynamic environment. It's based on it moves around based on the wind and waves and the current that changes it. This is a 2018 image of Gull Point taken from the drone by the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. This is 2019. You can see how it's changed. And here's 2021. Sorry. I told you, it's possessed. Here's 2021. So you can see that how it changes. This area here is particularly dynamic, and this year we had a lot of erosion in this area, and this edge became kind of a steep cliff that was difficult to maneuver when you were walking around the point. This is the observation deck at Gull Point. The area is closed during the season to anybody. And so we do most of our observations from this platform. And those are the turkey vultures that greet me just about every morning when I get out there, waiting for me to stop moving so that they can have dinner. We do sometimes go out into the closed area for a short list of reasons. And they're primarily to identify particular birds. The first thing we're going to look at is the piping plover. And I'm just going to do a brief overview of the history of piping plovers in the Great Lakes population. And I do want to say that in the course of this presentation, you're probably going to see a lot of blurry pictures, primarily because I do work at a distance and I take most of my photographs through a spotting scope with my phone. So they're not necessarily going to be the highest quality photographer quality photographs. I do my best with what I have. There are approximately 8,000 or so piping plovers in the world. There are 3 separate populations, one on the Atlantic coast and one in the Great Plains. And those 2 populations are considered threatened, federally threatened. The Great Lakes population, because it's so small, is actually considered federally endangered and state endangered. In the Great Lakes, we have nesting sites throughout. This map's a little outdated, so there are sites on Lake Erie and New York, in New York. And of course, in 2017, we also became one of the nesting sites, which is a really great thing. Currently, the birds are nesting on all of the Great Lakes again, which is a nice big step towards recovery, because they're starting to populate some of their more historic nesting sites. Very briefly, piping plover stats from the last couple of years. Last year, there were 74 pairs across the basin. That's throughout the entire Great Lakes. Those 74 pairs fledged 137 chicks. 124 of them were fledged in the wild. In 2022, you can see that the pairs dropped and we only had 72 pairs, but they managed to fledge 160 chicks and 150 of them in the wild. And when I talk about the wild population, I need to just briefly mention that there are chicks that eggs are collected and they are raised in a captive rearing situation. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. At Presque, since 2017, we've had a variety of pairs. We did have 2 pairs in 2017, but one of those nests was lost to high water. And the 2 chicks that survived out of that were in captive rearing and were fledged in another location. But of course, there still are birds. And we had 2 wild fledged chicks here. In 2018 through 2020, we had a single pair of birds and 4 fledges each year. Last year was the absolutely super crazy year where we had 1 male, 3 females, 4 nests, and out of all of those, only 2 chicks fledged. And this year we had 2 nests, which is a nice milestone. We'll talk about that in a minute. and a total of 5 wild fledged chicks from those 2 nests, and 4 that were raised in captive rearing. And once again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But so far, we've had 27 fledges in total created here at Presque State Park, which is a nice growing number. We're very happy about that. I'm going to take a little bit of time just to explain the banding that you see on Great Lakes piping plovers, primarily because it's important to recognize in the field. And when I talk about some of the banding later, you'll have an idea what I'm talking about. The silver band, which is metal, is a U.S. Geological Survey band, and all birds who were banded get a band like that. Each one has a unique number on it. The orange flag, which is the orange band, which is plastic, has a little flag on the back of it. Indicates that this is a bird from the Great Lakes piping plover population. And then beyond that, the other bands that you see here are unique to the bird. They're combined in a way that each bird is unduplicated so that we can identify a particular individual. And this is important for us to be able to track where birds go. And the University of Minnesota is the organization that keeps the records, and they can tell us where our birds, if we have a bird show up at Gull Point, they can tell us where it was hatched and where it might have been the previous year. And this, by the way, is our pioneer bird, Jerry, who first arrived in 2016. And these are his adult band combination. And the PowerPoint decided to move forward. This is Jerry in the earlier years when he still had his chick band combination. You can see it's different. And I just briefly want to say that chick band combinations are not unique to each individual bird. Each bird in one brood or one nest gets the same color combination, and then they're distinguished individually by either a colored dot on one of the bands and a number on one of the other bands, which is a little harder to read, but nonetheless they can be identified. Oftentimes birds that go on to nest will be recaptured and rebanded as an adult so that they have a unique combination that you don't have to try to read a dot or try to read a number on. But here is 2017, here we are in 2022, which compared to last year, was an almost normal year. Last year it was a soap opera called All My Plovers. Jerry is still with us, and the season started on April 15th. I use the same slide every year because it's always cold, wet, and brown. And Jerry showed up on April 18th. And so did this bird, a new female that we hadn't seen before. And she had nested successfully last year at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. But so we weren't sure if she was going to stay or if she was going to just move on and continue her migration to Michigan. But our Casanova Jerry convinced her to stay, and he courts her, and she's receptive, and they do eventually create a nest. But we have another problem. If you were in my presentation last year, Jerry developed a wandering eye last year and managed to court every single female that was on Gull Point, and he created a nest with all 3 of them, or created nests with all 3 of them. And he started doing the same thing this year. And these 2 females were unmated. There were no other males at Gull Point at the time. And they showed up, and to make things more difficult, both of these birds, who are very similar in appearance, obviously, also had the same band combination because they are both wearing chick bands. And we weren't sure if Jerry was messing around with one of them or both of them. And we got the answer actually fairly quickly when on June 16th, we had seen a bird that appeared to be incubating. And so the Game Commission came out and biologists went out and checked out the nest, and he found a nest with 7 eggs in it. A typical piping plover nest has 4 eggs. So we knew that something fishy was going on. And we were speculating that one bird started the nest with Jerry, and the other female, instead of creating a new nest or using a new nest that she and Jerry, Jerry does, the males do the scraping and the females choose which scrape they want. She was just dumping her eggs in the same nest as the first female. Now, these eggs were determined to be at risk because a piping plover is too small to incubate more than 4 or 5 eggs at the most. So what happened was these live eggs were salvaged and replaced. And when I say salvage, that means that they were removed from the scrape and taken to, transported to the Detroit Zoo for incubation. And eventually they would go on to being reared in the captive rearing facility in Michigan. They were replaced with artificial eggs. And so that the birds that were using that nest wouldn't try re-nesting again, which is something we didn't want them to do. So that actually worked. And Jerry, instead of messing around with these 2 other females, started spending more time back in his first nest with the first female that was nicknamed Eve. And so we thought, okay, so everything's going along pretty well. And a new female shows up, and she, of course, is once again at risk of becoming one of Jerry's harem. And this bird was from Silver Lake, nested in Silver Lake, Michigan last year, but for some reason she ended up here. And thankfully, another male showed up, and it was this bird. And these are really blurry pictures, and I apologize, but this bird was had very recognizable bands. He was, we called him Red Dot because he has chick bands and the red dot distinguishing him. And it turns out that he was one of our chicks that fledged here last year. And the interesting story about Red Dot is that last fall, after he left here and went south to winter, he was discovered by someone in Florida, Sherry Hollis, and I invited her to be here tonight. I hope she is. She contacted us and let us know that one of our birds was there. So it was nice to know that he had reached the wintering ground and everything was cool. And then she saw him again this spring, and he hadn't left yet, but he eventually did, and he showed up here and became the father of Nest 2, which I'll talk about in a minute. And lo and behold, this fall, Sherry found him again on the same beach where he had wintered last year, and it's Bunch Beach in Florida. Unfortunately, Bunch Beach is very near Sanibel Island. And of course, Sanibel was devastated by Hurricane Ian. And Sherry actually lives on Sanibel Island. She just got back to her house yesterday for the first time. She promises to keep an eye out for him, and we're hoping that he has weathered Hurricane Ian himself. So that's a little backstory on this guy. We're a little worried about him. They liked each other, and they set about courting, and this is them courting. It's called a tilt display. that's the male in front, and he kind of spreads his wings out and shows off his tail, and the female stands behind him or underneath him, and that's part of their courtship behavior. And they form a nest, and on June 10th, nest 2 was identified and disclosed, and I've got a horrible typo there. And you can see this is the exclosure, which is essentially like a wire cage that the adult birds can move in and out of, but it keeps ground predators, or keeps predators away from the eggs. There's also installing a pole to put a trail camera on that is motion detected. And so the Game Commission can watch the birds when we aren't there to make sure everything's going okay, and maybe catch any kind of activity that's going on near the nest. You'll also see piles of sand, which is not the usual procedure for putting in an exclosure, but this year predator guards were installed around the exclosures, and you can see the exclosure here, and you can see this white lattice work, and that's a predator guard, and it's put underneath the sand right up next to the exclosure, and that is to prevent ground predators from digging under the exclosure and getting up into the nest. And that's starting to be done primarily because the instance of mammalian predators doing that is increasing. And we had a predation last year at Gull Point by a possum for one of the nests. So that is what was going on there. Now, with the installation of that exclosure and the discovery of that nest, for the first time since 2017, our first year, we have 2 distinct pairs of piping plovers and 2 nests at Gull Point. And so therefore it was time to celebrate. We had a little Yahoo. Meanwhile, on June 20th and 21st, 4 chicks hatch at the first nest. And you can see here one of the adult birds, and it's probably still sitting on an egg or some of the other chicks. And here's one little floofball running away already, up and feeding himself within hours of hatching. And unfortunately, one of those chicks didn't make it. It was lost fairly soon after hatch, when we never really, the camera caught 4 chicks, but we've only saw 3. But those 3 were adorable, of course. Here they are at 7 days old, looking for food along the shoreline at Gull Point. They are piping plovers are precocial, which means that they are up and running and feeding themselves within a couple of hours after hatching. The parents never feed them. They are entirely independent. They're a little wobbly when they first get out there, but they quickly learn to feed themselves. When I always consider that like one of the most amazing things, that these little ones already have the instinct and know how to do it. But yes, this is one of the most exciting times of the season, because when we have chicks on the beach, it's always a pleasure. And more good news is coming here. Nest 2 hatches on July 10th, and we have 4 chicks. You can see one hiding here under mama. These are this is a trail cam photo. And those are provided to us by the Game Commission, which we're grateful for. And then this is a long distance shot of one of the chicks, 1 day old, the next day, that I took through my spotting scope. So it was here's one of the chicks at 6 days old, and here is the female brooding one of the chicks. Chicks don't self-regulate their temperature for the first week or so. And so they need to periodically hide under a parent to warm back up and probably to feel secure. The 4 chicks were seen for a while, but unfortunately we lost 2 of them, and only 2 of those fledged. So 3 chicks from the first nest fledged and 2 from the second nest fledged. But you remember those eggs that were sent to Michigan? Also on July 10th, they hatched in their incubator in Detroit. And here are some photos of that. And these photos are provided, these birds became bird world celebrities because a very famous photographer, Pete Souza, who used to be President Obama's official photographer, came up and documented their hatching. And so here's one of his photos of the chick, the first egg that is starting to hatch. And then I'm going to show you a little video here. And here it's very short, so keep an eye on it. Here is that egg is in the process of hatching. You can see its little wing and its head, and it's struggling really, really hard to get out of its shell. And it's, kind of an amazing thing. We typically don't see piping plovers hatch because they're usually under a parent. So this was an amazing opportunity to see what they look like when they hatch. And this is the video again. Here is the bird after it's kind of come out of its shell. And you can see that it's still very wet and damp and doesn't look at all like what a piping plover chick looks like when we see them after they've dried off. And amazingly, this is a photo of that same chick being weighed. And if you note the scale down here, this chick weighed 7.47 grams, which is, this is the ounces, so it's less than 0.27 ounces. And if you're looking for an equivalent, it is the weight of 1/4 and 1 dime. And I looked around the house for something that weighed 7.5 grams, finally found 1/4 and a dime together weigh about 7.5 grams, and also 5 or 6 blueberries. So if you ever have blueberries in your refrigerator and you take some out, put 5 or 6 of them in your hands, and that's how much these plovers weigh when they're born, approximately, which also is another miracle that they can survive. Now we're going to start talking about common terns, and we will go do a season recap in a minute. Common terns are considered state endangered, as I mentioned before. Unlike piping plovers, who are loosely colonial, common terns are much more colonial in their nesting desires. And they do this because they count on a large group of adult birds to protect the group from predators. And their defensive strategy towards predators is to collectively and actively harass the predator. And they group together and mob a predator. A piping plover defense mechanism is to lie still on the ground and counting on camouflage to hide them. So a piping plover parent will chase off a predator, but for avian predators, they typically just lie down on the ground and hide. But because of the colonial nature of common terns, it's much more difficult for smaller numbers of birds, adult birds in one place, to successfully nest. Their history at Presque from the early 20th century, Clyde Todd, who was an ornithologist for the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, noted that in 1904, he was pretty certain that nesting was occurring at Presque Isle. And by the 1927, there were 25 pairs nesting. and a small sanctuary was created. This was not at Gull Point where it is today, because Gull Point didn't extend that far out. But by 1931, the colony had grown to cover a quarter mile and had more than 125 nests. There is no notes of fledging in Todd's work. In more recent times, we had birds, in more recent sources, we've had birds nesting, recorded nesting as late as 1966. Unfortunately, those birds don't note whether any birds fledged or not. But this year, well, in more recent times, 1993, Gull Point is closed as a sanctuary. In 1995 and 2012, nests are found, but neither of them were successful. As of 2015, they actually, at one point, Gull Point hosted 8 nests, which is could be considered a good small colony. But unfortunately, those eggs were taken by predators or storms before they had a chance to hatch. This year, however, only one pair attempted to nest, and these are our 2 parents right here near the nesting site. And they actually managed to prevent predators until the birds hatched. And so the first time since at least 1966, we had actually had tern chicks on the beach, which was thrilling because we haven't had that in for a very long time. And of course, it was fabulous to watch the chicks when we could see them. They were oftentimes hiding in a big pile of driftwood, and it was difficult to see them. This is one view that I got of one of the chicks through my scope. This is I just didn't crop the picture so that you could see. Basically, this is how I see things at a distance, and I'm way far away from these folks, and my spotting scope brings them a little closer, but you can see that the photo is taken through the scope and it still has the ring around it. So that was the view, and you can see the chick right in here, and here is a closer view. So here's one of our 2 chicks. They did have 3 eggs, but only 2 chicks were ever seen. And now I'm going to show you the one video that I got of chicks. And it's a relatively short video, and it's shaky, and it was the best I could do. Before I started, I want to point out that there is one chick right here already. Another one's going to be coming in from the right-hand side. So watch carefully. You can see it's preening there a little bit. There comes the other guy. I was pretty darn excited to get this video because it's hopefully going to be, you know, the beginning of a new colony. And unfortunately, the bad news was that after June 25th, we did not see any chicks. They were old enough. They were not old enough to fly, so they couldn't have left. So we think we lost them to a predator. But of course, we keep hoping that they will continue to try. And to kind of alleviate that sadness a little, we're going to take a look at some of the other interesting birds that were seen at Gull Point this season. First of all, the very elegant American avocet. We had a good number of them this year, with that beautiful upturned bill, the long legs, which are blue, by the way, you can't really tell there. The bold black and white plumage. I almost said foliage. Whimbrel, we've had the most I've ever had in a season here. It has a down curved beak and long legs as well, but is a little stockier. And we actually had 23 instances of observation. Some of those are duplicate birds, but one day we had 5 whimbrels at the same time. So they are increasing in, in their presence, or so it seems right now. A bad picture of a marbled godwit, another long beaked bird with long legs. And you can't really get a sense for why it's called a marbled godwit, but it has a very mottled plumage. This is obviously one of those long distance shots. And then here's a better shot of another kind of godwit called a Hudsonian godwit. This guy was molting out of his breeding plumage and back into his basic plumage for the winter. So this was taken in August, I think August. But shorebirds, their mating season is very short. They breed up in the Arctic mostly, and then they leave quickly. And so as early as late July, birds are already moving south towards the wintering ground. And oftentimes Gull Point is a stopover for that. It's a very, very critical stop for a lot of birds. And by the way, this was the first Hudsonian godwit I ever saw at Gull Point. I had seen one before, but this was the first one I've ever seen at Gull Point. So that was a big event for me. It was nice to see. This is not a shorebird. It's a gull. It's a laughing gull. And you can see it's, you can kind of make out its red bill. It's already starting to molt out of its summer plumage, the full black head and the big white eye ring. If you spent any time on the Atlantic coast, you probably saw hundreds, if not thousands of laughing gulls, but they are not they're not prominent here at all. They would consider rare. I have seen, I think I would call unscientific anecdotal observation that, I see one or maybe two every season now. And at the beginning, I never said. So that's an interesting development. This guy, a Wilson's phalarope, which is a smaller bird, still longish in the legs, and has a sharp, very, very fine pointed bill. One of the things that phalaropes are known for is that the female is the more brilliantly plumaged of the species, and the male does most of the nest tending. Another thing that phalaropes are famous for is a behavior that they do to stir up food sources, and they will spin in shallow water, and that will disturb the mud or the soil underneath the water, and it brings invertebrates to the surface that the phalarope will pick off. And unfortunately, I've seen phalaropes. I've never seen one do that. I'd really like to see that behavior. Still on my bucket list. Okay. And our last final rarity, and this one's a real rarity, a snowy plover. If you look at range maps for snowy plovers, they're not supposed to be here at all. They're not even in the rare zone, but we've had a couple here at Gull Point in, I think the last one was 2013. These are, I didn't see this bird very close at all. So these are very grainy, distant photographs, but you can see that they're similar to piping plovers. Piping plovers have orange legs and orange in their bills when they're in the breeding season. Snowy plovers are a little bit smaller and have black legs and black bills at all the time. They have a neck band like a piping plover, but typically they're not nearly complete. And they also have that black eye patch. And just because these are such bad photographs, here is what one looks like in a good photograph. So you can see the black in the eye and the little bit of black in the forehead. the black bill, the black legs, but the back is very similar in color to that sandy brown piping plover, and the neck band is black, just like a piping plover, but like I said, not nearly as complete, especially compared to a Great Lakes piping plover. So after 5 long months, from April 15th to September 15th, these are the results of our season. The common terns had 1 pair. They had 1 nest with 3 eggs in it. 2 chicks actually hatched, which was a big celebratory moment for us. Unfortunately, 0 fledged. With piping plovers, we had 2 pairs. Yay! 2 extra females, which kind of almost threw a monkey wrench into our plans. We had 3 nests. One of the nests, the eggs from that nest went to captive rearing. 15 eggs were produced in total. 5 chicks were wild fledged, and 4 chicks were fledged in Michigan. But as I said before, even though they fledged in Michigan, they're still our birds because they were conceived here, shall we say. And to this is kind of a personal tribute. This is Jerry, our pioneer, who first arrived here in 2016 and created the first nest in 2017 with his partner Jean, who is no longer with us. But since 2017, this bird, who was in his 2nd year of adult life, since then has created 40 eggs with his partners, 11 of them just this year, and is responsible in part for the fledging of 19 chicks into the population, 7 of them this year. And I decided that after 7 years of knowing this bird, that he and 6 years of him coming back and becoming kind of a regular, shall we say, that he's now a legend, and he gets a crown for his efforts. We of course look forward to him coming back next year, but we're always prepared for him to not come back. We don't know where he winters, so we have no way of knowing how he gets around in the winter and where he goes and what he does, except eat. And a lot of people ask, what can we do to help? Well, the first thing that you can do perhaps is become a member of Erie Bird Observatory, help us continue this work. But there's also something going on right now on the federal level. There's something called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. It's those are the bill numbers in the House and the Senate. This is a federal bill, and it has bipartisan support. What it does is increase and dedicate funding to state fish and wildlife agencies. The Senate bill also has money for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the money is specifically designated to aid in recovery of endangered species and prevention of thousands more from becoming endangered. Birds and mammals, fish, all wildlife. In Pennsylvania, it will support research and conservation actions for Pennsylvania's 664 bird species of the greatest conservation need, and that includes both the piping plover and the common tern. We recommend that you contact your legislator about these bills and ask them to support them. The Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey is a co-sponsor of the bill in the Senate, so we know that we have his support. Apparently, Senator Toomey staff has also indicated that he too may support the bill. The House version passed this summer in June, and the Senate will be voting on it after they reconvene after the election. So it would be a wonderful thing if you could contact your legislators and ask them to support these measures. The there's a long URL there. That's just one of the locations that you can find sample letters, more information about the bills. But I think all you have to do is type in a search engine, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and it should be very easy to find information about it. And we appreciate that because you can help us help them. And that's kind of it. If you want to find Erie Bird Observatory, we're at eriebirdobservatory.org, at bird_Erie on Twitter and Instagram, and Erie Bird Observatory and PISP Bird Banding on Facebook. And I will be more than happy to take some questions. I will stop my slide sharing so that we can talk.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, that was very, very interesting, Mary, really interesting. Regarding the House and Senate bill, I'll make sure that we get some information put on our Facebook page for Presque Audubon, and that is in our website too. That would be great if that passes. Let's see. I'm going to go to the chat. There were some hello there's. Let's see. We had a fellow join us from Rochester. Mary, I noticed on your map there was a couple of nests on Lake Ontario. Were those further east of Rochester, though? Do you know?
We wouldn't be further east. I have to look at a map.
Okay.
My New York geography is not that great.
Okay.
Well, I believe there's one near Rochester.
Okay.
But I'd have to go back to that slide and kind of take a look.
That's okay. I was wondering if you knew off the top of your head. Yeah.
Hello from Rochester. Hello to Rochester. Thank you for joining us.
And again, if you want to turn on your video so people can see your faces, that's fine to do at this point then. One of the question is, what happened to the extra 2 females?
That's well, they when they put the artificial eggs in the nest, they exclosed it like they would any other nest, and one or the other, and even Jerry a couple of times went and incubated the eggs. But eventually, if the eggs don't hatch, the birds kind of give up and abandon the nest. And that's essentially what happened. And by that time, it was too late for them to re-nest, so we didn't have to worry about them starting all over again.
Okay. All right. And the 2 terns that were lost, any idea what the predators were?
No. I wasn't there for the predation, but terns, if a bird can't fly yet, I would think that it'd be based on the size that the birds already were. You know, those chicks were pretty good size. I would guess that it was a ground predator, unless a peregrine falcon probably could have taken them as well.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a whole host of potential predators there.
And are there any plans to put in any of those? I forget the term that you used. It looks like lattice work, white lattice work, to protect the tern nest in the future.
Well, the tern nests don't get the exclosure cage. They don't get that, primarily because the way piping plovers enter a nest is, if they're flying, they'll land farther away from the nest and then walk in, and that is a way to keep predators from being alerted to where the nest is. Okay. But common terns will fly down directly into their nests, so they can't put an exclosure with a top over or around the nest. a tern biologist would have to answer more complicated questions in that regard. I personally would love to protect them in some way, but I don't have jurisdiction over the birds and wouldn't be able to, other places have built, when predators were a problem, they've built artificial nesting islands away from the water that predators couldn't, non-avian predators couldn't get to. But I mean, even, some mammals will swim to get to food. So, it's a question for the Game Commission primarily.
Okay, all right. There a couple of comments of Jerry's bling that the crowd put on. They love that. Fantastic. There, the presentation was very good. A question about the chicks. Why are they not uniquely banded?
Well, it's kind of a morbid reason, primarily because if the most mortality occurs within the first year. And so if you individually band every chick with unique color bands, you end up using up a lot more banding combinations. So the chicks, since they all come from the same nest, are banded with very, similar or with, exact ones, except for the number and the dot. And that helps us also, be able to still recognize the difference. It's just harder to see because you have to find the dot and you have to find the number.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, most mortality happens within the first year.
Let me admit somebody here. All right, next question. Does the International Joint Commission for the Great Lakes contribute anything?
Like towards, I know what the International Joint Commission is. They're primarily concerned with water issues. So I'm not sure what they would contribute. You mean like money?
Hi, Mary.
Yes.
Hi, Mary, was my question. And they seem also on their website to deal with wetland issues as well. So I was just wondering if they contributed anything financially or resource-wise in any way.
No, no, because Gull Point is not a wetland. I mean, if that's what you meant. But we don't have any financial support from the Joint Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a hello to you from Hanover, Pennsylvania, from Tyler. I'll save
Tyler.
Yeah, I'll save the chat for you so you get to see it there.
Okay.
Let's see. Is there any effort to trap or control the mammal predators? I think you've talked about that already, at least for the plovers. Yeah.
No.
What do piping plovers eat?
What do piping plovers eat? Piping plovers eat invertebrates, like in the marine environment, a lot of marine worms. We don't have as many worms here. They eat insects, all kinds of invertebrates, little. I know that I'm always excited when the midges hatch at Gull Point because they eat a lot of midges. They're particularly easy for piping plover chicks to get to because they hang down in the lower vegetation and are a ready meal for a lot of the shorebirds out there. But any kind of like small crustacean, I actually saw one try to eat a fish one time. It was a little tiny, gizzard shad or something, but it didn't happen. It didn't. It just played with it for a while and couldn't figure out how to get it down its gullet.
Okay. Let's see. It sounds like Nellie didn't come back to Ohio. Did any other PA plovers show up anywhere we know about?
Did any of yes, I'm sure our plovers were sighted in other locations, but we don't get that information on a regular basis. We would have to specifically ask if if that were where they go. The University of Minnesota keeps those records. And during the season, it's too busy to, say, hey, can you tell us, where all our birds went? Yes, Nellie did not come back to Ohio. Neither did Nish. We don't know what happened to them. No other birds took their place in Ohio this year, which was very sad for the people there. We're hoping, of course, that they do come back, and that another pair also make their way to Chicago to take the place of Monty and Rose.
Did you say in your presentation how physically far apart the tern nest was from the plovers nests?
No, I didn't. I'm terrible at gauging distance. Less than a football field.
That's close enough. Okay. Are there any
Yeah,
other?
well, from one of the nests.
Okay.
The tern nest was on the southeast point. One of the plover nests was like less than a football field away. The other plover nest was like up on the north side.
Okay. And are there any other shorebirds that used to nest on Gull Point at Presque that you would also like to see come back besides the common tern and the piping plover?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But I have never done that research. I mean, we still have killdeer and spotted sandpiper. I don't know if others. One of the great mysteries is the Caspian terns. We see them, they show up in the spring. We see them copulating, but we never know where they actually nest. And then at some point later in the summer, we start seeing juveniles.
Huh.
So that's a real big mystery. That I haven't had the chance to investigate.
Okay. And do you have any figures as to, with the Great Lakes piping plovers, the ratio of males to females, or are there equal numbers?
That's a really interesting question. When I went in 2013, I went to Michigan to learn how to be a plover monitor. And at that particular time, there was a shortage of females. And so there were males that were going without mates. And now that situation has reversed. And there are more females than there are males. And the kind of behavior that Jerry has been exhibiting has been seen in other places. I'm sure the folks who work with much larger groups of piping plovers would be able to give us more details there. But that sort of extra pair bonding is showing up in other places because of the extra females and lack of males.
Interesting. Okay.
So it does fluctuate.
Okay. There's a note here from Chris Lundberg that black terns have nested at one time in Niagara Pond.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in Niagara Pond. I forgot about them.
Okay. And hello from New Hope Audubon in Durham, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Glad to hear about the Gull Point piping plovers. We enjoyed learning about Nellie and Nish at the biggest week. Thanks, Mary.
Oh,
Okay.
hi, Ann. You should put your picture up here so I can actually like see you in person. There you are. Hi. All these people that I know on Facebook that I don't know.
Well, there's a comment from Beth McGuire. I attended Festival of the Birds a few years ago. The keynote speaker did a big year. Something print of a piping plover had it framed. It's hanging in our bedroom. Thank you. Great presentation. Next, Nellie, Scott Gerharder says to everyone, Nellie and Nish did not return. Fledged 4, lost 1 to predation. 1 wound up in the Detroit Zoo, Erie, but passed recently.
Yeah, the bird's name was Erie.
Yeah.
Yeah, they decided that he wasn't going to be able to make it in the wild, or she, I can't remember now. And it eventually it died in captivity. So I haven't heard a lot of details about that.
Okay. Well, any other questions from anyone out there? Comments?
She, okay, Erie
She.
was a she.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Mary, you had up to 60 participants at one time.
They're all gone now.
No. Most are still here. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's,
Mary, question.
yes,
How do you tell a he from a she?
piping plover.
Yes.
Well, sometimes it's tough, but the forehead band on a male will more than likely reach all the way into the eye ring, and the collar will always be full and wide. Some Great Lakes piping plover females have complete, typically they say that, you can tell the female because they have incomplete collars. But in the Great Lakes population, there are females that have full collars. They're typically a little thinner in nature, but I learned in Michigan that they have been fooled many times when they thought a bird was male, and it turned out they found it copulating with a male. Another distinguishing field mark is the beak. There's a much clearer distinction between the orange part and the black part at the tip on a male. And the orange is usually brighter and it's a little duller on the female. But all of that is variable.
So there's no way of knowing with the chicks whether you have males or females.
Oh, not with the chicks, no.
No.
They're all, I mean, when our fledges leave, we have no idea if they're boys or girls. We were excited to learn that red dot, when it was seen down in Florida, was a boy, because he put on male plumage this spring, and of course we saw him again when he showed up here. But yeah, you can't tell until they get their adult plumage.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? There's a lot of thank yous in the chat. Great presentation and thank yous.
It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.